So Paul George pretty much single-handedly carried this struggling Clippers team to a win against the Rockets last night when I'm recording this at least. And it was as much because of his defense as it was because of his offense. Paul George is like an all-time wing defender, one of the best of the generation, and it was fully on display. His screen navigation, just general off-ball defensive aptitude for someone his size and strength is legendary, absolutely legendary. He's so good getting through traffic and screens and covering for mistakes. Like here, he's trying to tell Marcus Morris to get out to this shooter, but when he doesn't, PG doesn't fly by. He's under control and is able to block that three from behind somehow. His screen navigation and just general attachment skills are really second to none for like wing defenders of real forward size. Watch the footwork. Look at how tight he's connected to both Jalen Green and Şengün on this DHO. He extends his left arm there to pressure as well while keeping his right arm attached to Jalen Green. There really isn't any separation here. And because of PG's length, he's able to knock away this ball for a steal. Watching it again in full, he's just so good at staying connected and not allowing any space on these kind of plays, which is huge in an NBA where offenses run plays like this all the time, or base their entire offense around plays like this. He's just so disruptive at all times. He's not letting Jabari breathe on this DHO, which denies this kind of action. The Rockets wanted to go to this dribble handoff between Jalen and Jabari, and Paul George said no, which is such a valuable thing to do. And again, he gets stuck for a second on this screen, but watch him fight back to actually get a hand near Jalen Green and ostensibly force a miss or force a more difficult shot. Is even when PG isn't able to get around a screen, and this is probably a moving screen anyway. He's always looking to contest and recover and use his speed and his size and his agility to get back into the play. These off-ball actions, I really consider this the most. Aside from rim protection, this is really to me the most valuable thing to be incredible at, just because of how prominent. Even for players who are on-ball scorers, their plays will get set up with pin downs and Chicago actions and stuff. So being able to stay attached and not allow the defense to generate off-ball advantages is so huge, which is, arguably Paul George's best defensive skill. And even when he's not able to get over a screen, George has the know-how to kind of smoothly slide under. He sees that Jalen Green doesn't seem to be in a position to attempt to step back or to kind of reverse to the three-point line and punish his under. So PG is able to slide down and force a stop and an eventual pass out. His general pressure is so overwhelming. As we saw on the play with the Jabari DHO, he's just always on guys. He obviously is able to cut off Garrison Matthews, who's a little in over his head trying to get by Paul George. And then he's able to force a bad pass and a turnover because he's so attached. The value of constantly hounding guys is probably underappreciated. And Paul George is a nice example of this. When you don't give players room to breathe, you make them think, you make them overthink, and you force mistakes. And Paul George is incredible at not only forcing those mistakes, but capitalizing them as well. He had 6 steals and 2 blocks last night. Just an absolutely ridiculous figure. Paul George is an excellent nail defender as well. While Jalen Green still is able to find this cutter, it seems pretty clear that Paul George sitting in the nail and digging down impacts his drive a little bit as well. And just, again, that fear factor, the fact that offensive players have to know that Paul George is going to be lurking at the elbow impacts the way that you drive and the way that you process and the way that you go about your general attacks, which is what makes Paul George so awesome. Again, it's just these little kind of plays that often go unnoticed. Paul George is an awesome rim defender as well. While that's not, his greatest strength, he's a really solid rim protector as well for a guy of his size, always has been. And part of it is just because of how early he is looking to cut off drives and protect the rim. Kevin Porter Jr. decides to snatch this back because he sees Paul George lurking and ready to contest or block this shot. Even though he had Kennard and could have gone to the rim or made a pass, Paul George's presence scared him off. And eventually, the defense settles for a worse shot than they would have gotten if Paul George wasn't at the rim to deter that drive. This is just a cool play where it doesn't really look like Paul George is doing much, but it's a good example of the subtleties of backline defense and how PG orchestrates defense. He just hit like a contested mid-range jumper, and he's immediately going back with his hands out. He's a presence, he's engaged, he's active, which is underrated because a lot of especially star scorers aren't always like that. And we just see the little communication. He's telling Norm to pick up this cutter, and then he tells him he's got it. So Paul George is right there to pick up this cutter. Again, doesn't let Tari Eason get any room on him, and he's just shading here. He's trying to deter this pass to Garuba. Again, you see Tari threatens a cut, just a very explosive athlete, but Paul George makes it known that this cut is not going to be an option, and the Rockets settle for a tough shot that goes in, but this is the kind of shot you want to force as a defense, these like late clock deep pull-ups. Just this simple act of like shading is throwing off the offensive plan. Norm does a really good job fronting here, but it's also Paul George lurking and the fact that he is going to be there to help. Even if you can get that pass in, that likely is deterring the defense from making those plays. And obviously there are more overt examples of this backline defense where Paul George is playing this kind of same position, helping off of the corner guy. But this time, Eric Gordon is able to get a step on Nick Batum, and Paul George hops in and makes a great contest. And I think this was a block. I'm not positive, but either way, he's vertical until the last moment where he can bring his arm down to time that and get the ball, and he forces a turnover or a missed shot there. And then just to end this video, Paul George's clutch steal before his game-winning jumper as well, where it is just really hard to dribble around him, especially if you don't have a great handle or are kind of careless. Splitting a pick and roll, splitting a a gap this tight in pick and roll is difficult against anyone, but especially against someone with hands as elite and a wingspan as long and instincts as great as Paul George. And that steal and his jumper ended up being the difference in this game. So just wanted to break down some of what PG did because he's one of my favorite players in the league. And his defense is always just absolutely phenomenal, even when his offense has bad games. This obviously was an incredible offensive game, but the defense is really what ended up making the difference as well. So yeah, PG is really cool.